I had my head under the hood of a 1974 Massey Ferguson when she said it, which meant I got the whole sentence before I got her face. Does your future wife know how lucky she is? I came out from under there slower than I needed to, mostly to buy time, and Erin Stroud was standing about 6 feet away with a mug in each hand and an expression I could not read at all. There isn't one. That's not what I asked. I know it's not. I took the mug. I'm answering the interesting question instead. She laughed, properly, which she does not do often, and went and sat on the wheel arch, and I went back under the tractor with my ears going and did not come out for 11 minutes. I'm Hank Holt, 34. I'm an agricultural mechanic, which means I drive around a county in a van fixing machinery that other people have been told to scrap, and I have done it since I was 19. Erin Stroud bought the 11 acres next to my mother's place 2 years before that conversation. She came out of the city with a plan on paper, 41 goats over the following 18 months, and a level of research that everybody in that valley found funny for about 6 weeks and then stopped finding funny. She was not romantic about it. That is what people got wrong about her at the start. They saw a woman from the city with a small holding and they assumed lifestyle. And what they had was a woman who had read every extension. The state produces, and who could tell you the somatic cell count threshold for her milk contract off the top of her head? The valley's assessment changed on one particular day, and everybody remembers it. Second winter, February, the worst night of the year. Gil Ferris up the road lost power and rang around for anybody with a generator, and Erin Stroud turned up at 11 at night in a coat that had cost somebody a lot of money in a previous life, and ran a milking parlor for a man she had met twice, for 6 hours, on the correct settings, having asked exactly 3 questions. Gil has never once made a joke about the city since, and neither has anybody who was there. What she could not do when she arrived was fix anything. That is not a criticism. Nobody can. It takes years, and most of it cannot be read. And an 11-acre dairy runs on about 9 pieces of machinery, all of them old, all of them held together by people like me. So I ended up over there, a lot. First it was the milking vacuum pump, in the March, then the fencer, then the water heater, then the endless Massey, which is a 1974 tractor that 4 separate people, including my own father, have told her to weigh in, and which I have now rebuilt in stages over 2 years because it is a good machine, and because I have never in my life been able to walk away from something everybody else has written off. Here's what you need to know, and it is the whole engine of this story. Erin Stroud pays for everything, immediately, in full, in writing. I did not understand that at first. The first 2 jobs I did over there, I said the thing I say to half that valley, sort me out when you've got it, or drop a check in when you're up my way. And both times she wrote a check before I was back in the van. Third job, the water heater. I tried to wave it off entirely. It was a 40-minute job and a part I already had. She stood in her own yard and said, "Hank, how much?" "Honestly, it's nothing." "How much?" "Erin, I need you to give me a number." Her voice did something I had not heard from her before. "I'm not being difficult. I'm asking you for a number and I would like one." I gave her a number. She wrote it down. I did not ask why for another 1.5 years, and I want to be clear that this was not restraint. It was cowardice of a particular kind. I had decided it was probably about pride, and pride is a thing you leave alone, and leaving things alone is a skill I have overdeveloped. It was not about pride. By the 2nd year, we had a rhythm. I'd come over Tuesdays if she had something, and Sundays if she didn't. And Sundays had somehow become the fixed one, which is a thing neither of us arranged and neither of us mentioned. She'd have coffee going, I'd be under something. She'd sit on a wheel arch or an upturned crate and talk, and about 1/3 of the time she'd hand me tools I hadn't asked for and get it right, which by year 2 she did more often than not. I have never in my life talked to anybody the way I talked to that woman on those Sundays. I am not a talker. My mother will tell you. 2 long relationships in my 30s, both of which ended in a version of the same conversation, both of which involved the phrase, "I never know what's going on with you. I never know what's." And with Erin Stroud, I could not shut up. About the machines at first, because that's the safe subject, but then about my father, and about the year I nearly left the valley and didn't, and about the particular thing that happens to a man who is extremely good at one narrow, useful skill in a place where everybody needs it, which is that you become a function. Everybody in this county rings me, I said, one of those Sundays. Nobody in this county has ever asked me a single question about myself. Erin turned her mug round. I've asked you 9. I'm aware. That's why I'm telling you. I want to give you one Sunday, because 2 years of them is a number, and 1 is a thing you can see. August, 2nd year. 34 degrees, no shade in that yard, and I was on my back under the Massey doing something to a hydraulic line that should have taken 20 minutes and took 3 hours. She sat on the crate the entire time. She had a farm to run. There were about 9 things she should have been doing, and she sat on a crate in the heat for 3 hours, handing me things and talking. And at some point around hour 2, she said, "Can I ask you something that's none of my business?" "Go on. Why didn't you leave, the year you nearly did?" I was under a tractor and could not see her face, which is the only reason I answered it. My father had his first stroke in the March, and I had the job offer in the April. I had a spanner on a fitting I could not shift. And I told everybody I stayed for him. I have told that story for 11 years, and it's a good story, and it makes me look decent. But he was fine by the July. And I had the offer open until the September, and I let it close. The fitting went. I stayed because leaving meant finding out whether I was any good anywhere that wasn't here. And I've been fixing things in a 40-mile radius ever since, and everybody thinks I'm loyal. There was a long silence from the crate. "That's the second most honest thing anybody's ever said to me," Erin said. "What's the first?" "I'll tell you in about a year," she said, and it turned out she meant it almost exactly. She told me in the November. It came out sideways, which is how everything real comes out. She'd been on the phone in the kitchen when I arrived, and she came out looking wrong, and I asked, and she said, "My sister," and then she stood in her own yard and told me. She was with a man called Tate for 6 years, 24 to 30. He controlled the money. Not dramatically. There was no single day where it happened. It was a joint account at 26 that made sense, and then his name on the lease because his credit was better, and then a conversation about how it was silly for both of them to be paying separately for things, and by 29 she had a monthly transfer into her own account that he set the amount of. I was also, over about 4 years, extremely reasonable about her friends. Never forbade anybody. Just had a problem with each of them in turn, and each problem was small and plausible, and she stopped seeing people one at a time over a long enough stretch that she never once noticed a pattern. She left at 30 with about $9,000, no lease in her own name in 6 years, and 2 friends she'd kept by lying about where she was. "That's the whole thing," she said. "I'm not going to do the long version. The long version is boring, and it's mostly other people asking me why I didn't leave sooner. I wasn't going to ask that." "I know. That's why I'm telling you." She looked at the barn rather than at me. "So, the money." "You've been wondering for a year and a half, and you've been too polite." "I have. Everything I own is mine outright. The land, the herd, the plant, all of it. There's one loan, and I can see the end of it." She had her arms crossed. "And I don't run tabs. With anybody. Not the feed store, not the vet, not you. Not because I'm proud, Hank. Because an unpriced debt is a hand on a lever, and I have had a hand on a lever, and I am not doing it again." I did not say anything for a moment. "So every time I've said, don't worry about it. You've been trying to be kind. I know exactly what you've been doing." Her jaw went. And every single time, some part of me has done a small calculation about how much you'd be owed and what that might mean later. 18 months, every job. That is the sentence I would take back if I could take one back. Not something I said, something I made her spend 18 months doing. Here is what I said next, and I want it written down exactly, because it is the worst thing I've ever said to another person, and it took me 11 days to understand why. "Erin, I'm not him." She closed her eyes. "I know you're not. I've never once." "Hank," she opened them. "Stop. Please, just stop for a second." I stopped. I have known you 2 years and I know exactly who you are, and I have never once been frightened of you. And I need you to hear that first, because it's true." Her voice was level, and it was costing her something. "And then I need you to hear the second thing, which is that 'I'm not him' is a sentence about you. I don't. I have just told you the hardest thing about my life, and within about 9 seconds, you have made it a conversation about whether I've been fair to you." She was not angry. It would have been easier if she had been. "Every man I have told this to does it. Every single one. And the thing you're all defending yourselves against is a thing nobody accused you of." I stood in that yard with a wrench in my hand and could not think of one single word. "I'm not managing your feelings about my divorce, Hank," she said. "I've got a herd to milk." And she went and milked it. I did not go over the following Sunday. I want to be honest about that because I told myself it was giving her space, and it was not. I was humiliated, and I did not know what to do with it, and I did the thing I have always done, which has become extremely busy in a different part of the county. 11 days, 2 Sundays. I want to describe what happened in my head over those 11 days, because the useful part did not arrive until day 9, and everything before it was self-defense. Days 1 to 4. I ran the tape of that conversation, looking for the place where I had been treated unfairly, and I found several, and I polished them. I had said one clumsy sentence after being told something terrible, and she had taken my head off for it. That was my position, and I held it comfortably for 4 days. Day 5. I remembered that she had not, in fact, taken my head off. She had said one sentence, quietly, and then gone and milked 11 goats. Day 7. I understood that what had happened was that I had asked her to reassure me. In the 90 seconds after she told me the worst thing about her adult life, I had put a hand out and asked her to say, "You're one of the good ones." And she had declined, and I had gone away for 11 days about it. Day 9, I got to the bottom of it, on a road outside Halverson in the van, and the bottom was this. I had been frightened for 2 years that the only reason a woman like that had anything to do with a man like me was that I was useful, and she had just told me she'd been quietly pricing my usefulness the entire time. And instead of hearing what she said, I heard the thing I had been frightened of since the March of the first year. That is not her doing. That is a thing I brought to a yard and set down in front of a woman who had enough to carry. I went over on day 12, which was a Sunday, and I did not bring the van. She was in the barn. It was raining hard, the way it does in that valley in late November, and she was doing something to a gate hinge that she did not need me for and had clearly decided to do herself. "You've walked," she said. "I've walked. It's 4 miles. "It is." She put the screwdriver down. "I owe you an apology, and I've had 11 days to get it in the right order, so let me get through it." I stayed where I was, about 8 feet inside the door, dripping. "I'm sorry. Not for being clumsy, for what I actually did, which was, take the biggest thing you've ever told me and turn it into a question about whether I'm a good man. You'd asked me for nothing. I gave you a defense anyway and made you comfort me for it." Erin Stroud did not say anything. "And the money," I said. "I've been doing that for 18 months. I thought I was being generous, and what I was doing was insisting, every single time, that we do it my way, in a currency you'd told me you couldn't hold. I never told you why. You told me you wanted a number 3 times, and I argued with you 3 times. I made myself finish it. You didn't owe me the reason. You'd already given me the instruction. The rain did a great deal of work on that roof for about 4 seconds. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay, I accept it. And I'd like you to invoice me for 11 jobs going back 2 years at whatever your rate should have been, and I'd like it itemized." "Erin, some of those were 40 minutes. Itemized, Hank. Right. And one more thing." She wiped her hands on the front of her coat, which she does when she is about to do something she has decided on. "Would you come here, please?" I want it on record that she said please, that she asked, that in the 2 years since, I have thought about the fact that she asked more than I have thought about anything else that happened in that barn. I came there. It was not careful. 2 years of Sundays is a long time to be careful, and we had both run out of it in the same afternoon, and there was a 51-year-old tractor parked in that barn that got knocked into hard enough that something came off it, which I found in the spring and could not identify and have never replaced. "Right," she said, eventually into my shoulder. "Right. I want to say something, and I need to say it now rather than in a month." She pulled back enough to see my face. "I do this slowly. I'm not being coy and I'm not playing anything. I did fast once and it cost me 6 years, and this is the first thing in my adult life that has arrived at a speed I set. Okay? That's it. That's the whole speech. I just needed you to know that if I'm slow, it isn't doubt. Erin, I've walked 4 miles in the rain to apologize about invoicing. I think we can both take slow." She laughed into my coat, which is a sound I would work an entire winter for. Her family came in the January. I want to be clear that this is the actual story and everything before it was the setup, because I did not understand that at the time either. Colleen Stroud and Erin's sister Trish drove down from the city on a Thursday for 4 days, and they came to persuade her to sell up and come back. Not aggressively. Colleen Stroud is a warm woman who has never in her life raised her voice and who does most of her damage in a lower register than that. The arguments were, "It's been 2.5 years. The winters are brutal. You're 32. You're alone out here. There's nothing wrong with admitting a thing hasn't worked." I was there for 2 of the 4 days because Erin asked me to be, which I understood at the time as her wanting support and which I understand now as something far braver. She was introducing me. The first day was fine. Colleen was lovely to me. Trish asked what I did and then asked 3 follow-up questions, which in that family is a form of interrogation. The second day was the Saturday, and it went wrong at the kitchen table at about 4 in the afternoon. Colleen said the thing she had driven 200 miles to say. "Tate's been asking after you." The room did something. Erin put her mug down very carefully. "Has he? How was it your father's birthday? He always asks." Colleen was not being cruel. That is the part I need you to understand, and it took me a year to be able to say it. "Erin, I'm not saying anything about anything. I'm saying that man has never once said a word against you, and there are 2 sides to everything, and you were both so young." And I said, before Erin had opened her mouth, in her house, at her table, about her life. "Mrs. Stroud, with respect, I don't think you know what happened there. I want to describe the 4 seconds after that sentence." Colleen looked at me. Trish looked at me. And Erin Stroud looked at the table with an expression I had never seen on her before, and have never seen since, and which I have spent a long time being unable to think about. "I'll get more coffee," she said, and got up. Colleen was gracious about it. She said something mild, and we moved on, and the afternoon continued, and they left on the Sunday morning, and Colleen hugged her daughter and said, "We'll talk when you're ready." I helped clear up. I want to be honest, feeling reasonably good about myself. Erin waited until this car was out of the lane. "You spoke for me." I turned round. At the table. Yesterday. She was standing by the sink and she was not shouting, and it was much worse than that. "My mother said a thing about my marriage in my kitchen and you answered her." I know what she was doing. I've known what she's doing since 2019. I have had 4 conversations with that woman about it, and every single one of them cost me something, and I have got further each time. Her hands were flat on the counter. And on Saturday, I was about to have the 5th one. I had the sentence ready, Hank. I've been building it for 11 months. I did not say anything, and you got there first, and you were on my side, and you were right. She turned round. And now the version of Saturday that exists in my mother's head is that Erin's new man doesn't like Tate being mentioned. That's it. That's the whole thing she took home in the car. "Erin, it has been taken off me. Not because you meant to take it. Because you were in the room and you were quicker. I was defending you. You were explaining me." She said it flatly and it went straight through. In my own kitchen, to my own mother, about my own 6 years. "You did the thing, Hank. 2 months after I told you exactly what the thing looks like, you did a version of it, and you did it out of loyalty, which is precisely how it always looks. I stood in that kitchen and understood with total clarity that I was in the worst trouble of my adult life, and that every single instinct I had for getting out of it was another version of the same mistake. So I said, "What do you want me to do?" Which is, as far as I can tell, the only correct sentence available to a man in that position, and which I did not arrive at by being wise. I arrived at it by having run out of everything else. Erin looked at me for a long moment. "I don't know yet," she said, "and I need you to be able to hear that without disappearing for 11 days. "I can hear it." "Can you?" "No," I said, "but I'm going to." That was the 11th of January, and it did not resolve until the end of April, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. She did not end it. I want to be clear about that because that is what I braced for, and it is not what she did. We saw each other. Sundays continued. She was not cold, and she did not punish me, which would have been easier in a way I am ashamed of, because at least punishment ends. What she did was go quiet on one subject, which was her family, and I had to sit in the enormous gap where that subject had been and not reach into it. 3 times that winter I nearly did. The first was a Sunday in February when she came off a call with Trish and went out to the barn without saying anything. And I got as far as the barn door and turned round and went back to the tractor. The second was in March. Colleen sent a birthday card early with a note in it, and Erin read it standing at the counter and put it in a drawer, and I said absolutely nothing, and it took everything I have. The third was the worst, and nobody knows about it except her. In the April, I got as far as looking up Colleen Stroud's number in Erin's phone, which was on the kitchen table, which I had no business touching, and which I put down before I had written anything and stood in that kitchen shaking. I told her that night. All of it, including the shaking. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting and then said, "Thank you for telling me." And then, after a while, "And thank you for putting it down." It was close. I know it was close. That's why the thank you is real. I want to describe what those 3 months were actually like, because "we got through it" does no work at all. The hardest part was not the silence about her family. It was that I had to be present and useless at the same time, which is a combination I had never once managed in 34 years. I am a man who arrives when something is broken. That is the whole architecture of me. My father did it, his father did it, and in a valley like that it is not just a job, it is the entire way a man is permitted to say he cares about somebody. You do not tell Gil Ferris you are worried about him. You turn up on a Tuesday and do his breaks. And for 3 months, the only thing that would have helped was a thing I was barred from doing. So I learned 2 sentences that winter, and they have been worth more to me than every tool I own. The first is, do you want help with that, or do you want company while you do it? Erin says, it is the single most useful thing I have ever said, and she has taught it to 2 people since. The second is worse, and took longer. It is, I don't know. I said it for the first time in the March, in her kitchen, when she asked what I thought she should do about the contract, and every fiber of me had 4 opinions ready, and I looked at her and understood that she was not asking for them. She was testing whether the question was safe. I don't know, I said. She looked up. You've got about 6 ideas. I've got 9, and they're mine, and I've had them for 4 minutes, and you've been thinking about this for a year. I put my hands flat on the table, which I do when I am concentrating on not talking. So, I don't know. What are you thinking? That was the exact moment. Not the barn, not the tractor. Her kitchen in the March. A man saying 3 words he had never said in his adult life. She talked for 40 minutes. I said almost nothing. At the end of it, she said, "That's the first time in about 8 years anybody's let me finish getting to a decision." The winter after the family visit was the bad one. I want to be accurate about this because it is her part of the story and not mine. Milk price dropped in the January. Her main contract restructured in a way that cost her about 11%. And the small creamery that took her surplus went under in February, owing her $4,000 she never saw. By March, she was doing arithmetic at the kitchen table with a face I did not like. And I did not fix it. That is the single hardest thing I have ever done, and I want credit for it. And I also want it recorded that I had spent the previous year in training for it, without knowing that was what the year was. I have savings. I could have covered that 4,000 without noticing it, and I sat in my van in her yard in the first week of March with my phone in my hand and did not do it. What I did instead was ask her what she was thinking and then shut up, which I have learned is roughly 900% harder than fixing something. I got it wrong plenty. There were 2 evenings that spring where I offered a solution before she had finished a sentence and had to physically stop myself mid-word, and one where I did not stop and she said, "Hank," in a particular voice, and I said, "Sorry, carry on," and she did. That is the entire method, as far as I can tell, not being good at it. Being caught and stopping and letting the other person carry on. Her family offered, of course they did. Colleen rang in the second week of March and offered $14,000 immediately, no conditions stated, which is the most dangerous kind. Erin turned it down in a phone call that lasted 11 minutes and left her shaking on her own back step. "That was the hardest thing I've done since I left," she said. "Harder than leaving?" "Different. Leaving was one decision." She had her hands round a mug. "That was $14,000 from my mother who loves me. And I had to sit there and say no while a woman cried at me, because I know exactly what that money would have meant in 4 years, even though she doesn't. What would it have meant? That the farm was theirs, not on paper, in the room." She looked at the barn. "Every Christmas. Forever." And then she said the thing that told me the January had finally finished happening. I had the 5th conversation, by the way, on that call. She was not looking at me. The one I'd been building for 11 months. I said all of it. About the account and the lease and what he did to my friends, one at a time. What did she say? She went very quiet and then she said, "I didn't know that." And I said, "I've told you twice." And she said, "I don't think I heard it." Erin turned the mug round. "Which is probably true, and which is the only useful thing that woman has said to me in 4 years. I'm glad you got to have it." "I got to have it because you weren't in the room," she said. "I want you to know I've thought about that, and I'm not saying it to hurt you. It's just true, and you've earned the true version." She solved the money herself, in a way I had nothing to do with and did not understand until she explained it twice. She got a farmstead creamery license. She'd been researching it for 11 months without telling anybody, including me, and had the application 90% built before the winter went wrong. It meant she stopped selling raw milk at a commodity price and started selling cheese at 4 times the margin on a fraction of the volume. It also meant a full year of doing both at once, which is a workload I watched from the outside and would not have survived. I want to be exact about what that year looked like, because "she worked hard" does not cover it. Milking at 5:30 and again at 4:30. Make days 3 times a week on top of that, which is a 9-hour job you cannot leave. Affinage, the aging, which is another building, another set of readings, another thing to get up at 2 in the morning for when the humidity goes wrong. Plus the license inspections. Plus building a customer base from zero. Plus the existing contract she could not drop until the new income covered it. 14 months of that. She lost about 9 kilos and got a face I did not like, and I said so once, properly, in the November, and she said, "I know." 6 more months, and she was right, and it was 6 more months. I want to record what I did during those 14 months, because it is not nothing, and it is also not what I would have done 3 years earlier. I did the milking on Thursdays. That is it. That is the entire contribution. She asked in November, having worked out her own schedule and identified the one hole in it, whether I could do Thursday evening milking through the winter, and I said yes, and I did it for 14 months, and I invoiced her for none of it because she told me not to. That is worth stopping on. She told me not to. Somewhere in those 2 years, the thing had turned over. She kept the accounts clean with the feed store and the vet and every contractor in that valley, and with me she had arrived at something else, and neither of us made a speech about it. She just said, "One Thursday, don't invoice for these," and I said I wasn't going to, and that was the whole conversation. I did not build anything. I did not source a single piece of equipment. Twice, she asked me a direct question about a compressor, and I answered the question she asked and nothing else. And I am aware of how small that sounds, and I want you to understand it was the hardest work I did that year. There was one night in the following February, Vat night, 2 in the morning, something wrong with a chiller, where she rang me at 2:10 and said, "I need you." And I was in that van in about 90 seconds. And on the way over, I understood something that has not left me since, which is that being needed at 2 in the morning by somebody who asked is a completely different substance from being useful to somebody who didn't. Same job, same tools, entirely different man doing it. Why didn't you tell me you were working on it? Because you'd have helped. She said it flatly, no edge. You'd have been brilliant, and you'd have built me a curd table. And it would have been the best curd table in the state. And it would have been yours. That's a hard thing to hear. I know. I've been working out how to say it for about 4 months. She put a hand on my arm. Hank, I need one thing in my life that nobody else has a fingerprint on. One. After that, you can help with everything else forever. That is the sentence I have thought about most in the 11 years since. The first cheese that was actually good came out the following August. Not the first she sold, the first she was happy with, which is a different date, and which she has written on the back of a label in the office. She made me try it in the yard, out of the wrapper, with a knife off her belt. Well, it's very good. Hank, she had her arms crossed. You'd say that about a shoe. I'd say it's very good about a shoe. I wouldn't say it like this. I had another bit. That's the best thing I've eaten in this valley in 10 years, and I've eaten my mother's cooking for 34 of them. She turned round and walked 11 steps toward the barn and stood there for a minute with her back to me, and I did not follow her. And when she came back, her eyes were red, and neither of us said anything about it. I built the curd table in the second year. She asked me to, in writing, with a specification, and she paid me for it, and it is on an invoice. I asked her to marry me on that tractor, not romantically, not staged. It was a Sunday in the June, and we were both filthy, and the Massey had just started on the second turn for the first time in 4 years, and it was running, properly running, sounding like a machine and not like an argument. And I stood there listening to it and said without any plan at all, "Marry me." Erin took her ear defenders off. "What?" "Marry me." "Hank, I can't hear you. The tractor's—" And then she worked out what I'd said, and she stood in a yard with a rag in her hand and her mouth open. "4 people told you to scrap that," she said. 5, my father twice. And you rebuilt it over 4 years in bits on Sundays, for free, for a woman who wouldn't let you do anything for free. "That's the one thing you never invoiced me for," I said. I checked. She looked at the tractor for a long moment, then at me. "No," she said. "I never did." We married the following spring in her top field, which she chose, and which was a mistake because of the drainage, and which she will not be corrected about to this day. Colleen came. Trish came. It was not simple, and I'm not going to tell you. It was her mother and I did not have a real conversation for another 2 years, and the thing that eventually fixed it was not a conversation at all. It was Colleen standing in that creamery on a Tuesday, watching her daughter run a business she did not understand and could not have built. She rang Erin that night from the car, apparently, and said the only thing that has ever counted, which was, "I got him wrong and I got you wrong, and I'd like to start again." Erin has never told me the rest of that call, and I have never asked, and that is the single clearest measure of how far I have come. The Massey is still going. It is 51 years old. It has a new hydraulic pump, a rebuilt gearbox, 2 panels I made myself out of a different tractor, and an ignition that only works if you know the thing about the ignition. I have been offered money for it twice by men who understand what it is. Erin drives it more than I do. She learned on it, properly learned, over 2 winters, because she've asked me to teach her rather than fix it, and because I had to sit on my hands for the first 4 months while she did things slowly and wrongly, which was the actual test, and which I very nearly failed in week 2. She services it herself now. I am not permitted to touch the oil. Once, about 6 years in, Somebody at a farm sale asked me why I bothered with it. I said it runs, and he said yes, but it took you 4 years, and I said that's not a reason not to. Erin was standing about 8 feet away, pretending to look at a harrow, and she did not say anything about it until we were in the van. You know what you said back there? About the tractor. About the tractor, she said, and looked out the window, and did not say anything else for 11 miles. Have you ever been so busy defending somebody that you took the words out of their mouth?